I am Austin, and join me as we uncover 6 encounters where families encounter their last moment with wild animals. From a silent stretch of Rufiji River to a veteran honey collector with 15 years of experience in the Sundarbans who discovered that even experience isn't enough when a Bengal tiger is already waiting in the mangroves. But first, let's dive into the terrifying final moments of a Vsevolod in Russia. It was September 3, 2017, in the far eastern edge of Russia, near the forest boundary of Primorsky Krai. The land stretched for miles in cold silence. Dense birch and pine forests covered the hills like a wall. Fallen logs rotted beneath thick undergrowth. Narrow supply tracks twisted through the trees and disappeared into shadows where sunlight barely touched the ground. By early September, the nights had already started turning cold. This was Amur tiger territory. The logging operation had been active there for weeks. Heavy machinery worked from sunrise onward, chainsaws cutting through timber, engines rumbling non-stop, loaders dragging fallen trunks through mud and debris. The noise was constant, loud enough to shake birds from branches and carry deep into the tree line. Without realizing it, the workers had created a barrier. In regions where Amur tigers live, sustained industrial sound often pushes wildlife farther back into cover. Not permanently, just enough to keep distance between predator territory and human movement. The machines had been doing more than cutting wood. They had been warning the forest that humans were nearby. Then, shortly after mid-morning, the equipment failed. One machine stalled first, then another shut down. Within minutes, the entire site went silent. That silence changed everything. The forest immediately felt different. The workers noticed it without fully understanding why. The sudden absence of engine noise made every natural sound sharper. Branches creaking, wind brushing through pine needles, distant movement somewhere deeper in the trees. 47-year-old Vsevolod Bychkov stepped away from the equipment to inspect the problem. His wife, Elena, and their 16-year-old son, Prokhor, had joined him at the site during a short family visit before school resumed. Their younger daughter, Anya, only 11 years old, had stayed near one of the parked trucks earlier that morning, sketching trees in a notebook while the adults worked nearby. It was not unusual. Families often visited temporary logging camps in remote regions like this. The danger felt distant because nothing had happened there for a long time. Tiger sightings near the operation had become rare over recent seasons, and when a threat remains unseen long enough, people slowly stop organizing their lives around it. That softening of caution happens quietly. Nobody notices the exact moment they stop expecting danger. A supply path ahead of the camp had become blocked by fallen timber during earlier cutting work. Before restarting the machinery, someone needed to walk the route and clear debris. Vsevolod decided to handle it himself. Prokhor followed immediately, wanting to help. Elena came along a few steps behind them, calling for Anya to stay close near the trucks. But children rarely stay still in places that feel adventurous. By the time Elena realized Anya had wandered farther down the path to collect pine cones beside the brush line, the family had already moved deeper into the narrow corridor of trees. The path curved sharply between deadfall and dense vegetation. Branches leaned inward from both sides. Ferns and waist-high undergrowth swallowed visibility. In some places, a person could only see a few feet ahead before the forest closed completely around them. In terrain like that, humans do not move through the forest as hunters. They move through it blind. Amur tigers are the largest tiger subspecies on Earth. Adult males can weigh more than 600 pounds. Unlike predators that chase over distance, they rely on concealment and explosive close-range attacks. In dense forest, a tiger can position itself only a few feet away without being seen at all, and once it commits to the strike, the attack happens faster than human reaction time. The physical evidence later recovered from the site suggested the tiger had already been lying in cover near the blocked route before the family arrived. The shutdown of machinery had removed the wall of sound separating the animal from the work zone. Silence allowed the predator to move closer, unnoticed. Nobody saw it first. One moment, the forest was still. The next moment, it erupted. Workers back at the machinery later described hearing a scream cut off almost instantly, followed by crashing movement inside the brush. By the time several men grabbed tools and ran toward the sound, the attack had already spread through the narrow path. Wildlife officials later classified the incident as one of the deadliest tiger attacks connected to industrial encroachment in the region during that period. Their investigation pointed toward a pattern that had been quietly developing for years: logging activity pushing incrementally closer to undisturbed habitat, season after season, until the separation between human work zones and predator territory effectively disappeared. The machines had created an invisible boundary. The family never knew that boundary existed, and when the engines stopped, the forest moved back in almost immediately. While the Russian Far East would soon demonstrate that a predator which holds completely still can be just as lethal as one moving toward you, Rufiji had taken Hamza Tambwe in water that looked no different from any other morning. It was June 3, 2015. The lower Rufiji River in southern Tanzania does not look dangerous at first glance. That is the first thing people misunderstand about it. The river moves slowly through wide, flat country. Brown water slides past exposed sandbars and drifting branches in long, quiet arcs. River forests lean over the banks, their roots exposed where seasonal floods eat away the soil. In the mornings, mist hangs low above the surface while fishermen push small wooden boats into the current before sunrise. It is not a dramatic river, it is a working river. Families have fished the Rufiji for generations, and success there depends less on luck than familiarity. The people who know the bends, the depth changes, the current shifts, and the tidal timing are usually the people who return home with full nets. Over years, the river becomes less like wilderness and more like routine. That familiarity is what makes the danger possible. The long rains that year had pushed the water higher than normal. Flooded banks erased familiar edges, channels widened, sections of shoreline disappeared beneath murky water, and with the flooding came increased crocodile movement along stretches where local fishermen normally worked without concern. People had been talking about it quietly for weeks, not panic. Just stories, sightings near the shallows, missing goats along the banks, large drag marks in soft mud after sunrise. The kind of warnings that circulate through river communities, but rarely stop anyone from working, because work still has to happen. 42-year-old Hamza Tambwe had spent most of his life on the Rufiji. Fishing was not a hobby or occasional work. It was how he fed his family. He knew the productive bends of the river better than most people know the streets of their own neighborhood. That morning, he was not alone. His wife, Salma, had come with him to help manage the nets and sort the catch. Their 16-year-old son, Amur, sat near the stern, learning the work the same way he always had, by watching closely and repeating what his father did. Their youngest daughter, 12-year-old Nima, had insisted on joining too. School was out for the week, and family fishing trips were normal in their household. Nothing about the morning felt unusual. The family pushed upstream before sunrise, following a stretch where the current slowed near a wide bend lined with overhanging trees. High water had disrupted many of the usual fishing spots, so Hamza decided to try deeper along the flooded bank where fish often gathered after heavy rains. It was a reasonable decision. Experienced fishermen adapt to changing water conditions constantly. That adaptability is part of survival on rivers like the Rufiji. But high water changes more than fish movement. It changes predators too. At some point during the morning, one of the nets snagged beneath submerged debris near the shoreline. It happened often enough that nobody reacted with alarm. Hamza guided the boat closer while Salma steadied the side against the current. Then he stepped into the water to free the net. The depth barely reached his calves. That detail matters because danger on the Rufiji rarely looks dangerous before it happens. From the boat, the water appeared shallow, muddy, almost harmless. Nima later reportedly laughed when her father stumbled slightly against the hidden branches below the surface. A moment later, the river exploded. Nile crocodiles are the largest freshwater predators in Africa. Adult males can exceed 16 feet in length and weigh over 1,500 pounds. Unlike predators that chase openly, crocodiles rely almost entirely on concealment. They wait motionless beneath murky water, with only their eyes and nostrils exposed, features so small and flat against the surface that human vision often registers them as floating debris or shadow. The attack happens with almost no warning. The crocodile struck from the flooded edge beside the bank, not from deep water. Investigators later believed it had already been positioned inside the submerged vegetation while the family worked nearby. The initial bite caught Hamza low on the body and ripped him off balance instantly. Witness evidence suggested the crocodile rolled immediately after impact, dragging him sideways into deeper water before he could even shout. Salma screamed and lunged toward him instinctively. That decision pulled her directly into the strike zone. Crocodile attacks on groups often become chaotic because humans react toward each other, not away from danger. Salma entered the shallows trying to grab her husband while the surface churned violently around them. The second strike came almost immediately. Imara tried pushing the boat backward, using a wooden pole. Nima was crying and attempting to pull the tangled net free, as if freeing it would somehow free her parents too. But panic inside shallow water removes coordination fast. The crocodile surfaced again near the side of the boat. Investigators later believed either the same crocodile or a second nearby animal struck from beneath, destabilizing the narrow vessel during the confusion. By the time nearby boats arrived, the overturned vessel was drifting alone near the reeds. There was no sign of the family. Recovery teams searched the flooded banks for 2 days. The bodies were eventually found downstream at separate points along the river. Wildlife officials later connected the incident to increased crocodile displacement caused by seasonal flooding across the lower Rufiji basin. Physical evidence at the site, drag marks, bite patterns, disturbed mud at the flooded edge, and the overturned boat position matched a large Nile crocodile ambush staged from shallow water concealment. And I think that's the part people misunderstand most about rivers like the Rufiji. The danger is almost never dramatic beforehand. No roaring, no warning signs, no huge splash announcing that something deadly is nearby. The next story takes us to a farming settlement on the edge of Kenya's Tsavo region that would soon demonstrate that a lion which has already made a kill in a particular area is operating on a fundamentally different threshold than any lion you might encounter at a safe distance in open bush. It was April 22, 2016. The Tsavo ecosystem in southern Kenya carries a documented history of human-lion conflict that stretches back more than a century. Farmers know lions operate near their land. Lions have come to understand that human settlements are part of the landscape they move through. The knowledge runs in both directions, and it produces a specific, uneasy coexistence that holds most of the time, until it doesn't. The long rains had turned the grass tall. The air carried the smell of wet soil and livestock. The lions had killed a calf the night before. I want to stay with that sentence for a moment, because it is the sentence that makes everything that followed on April 22nd legible. A calf was killed overnight. In the Tsavo region, that is not an unusual event. It is a documented, recurring feature of life at the edge of this ecosystem. It registers, first and most immediately, as a livestock loss, as damage, as a financial blow, as something that needs to be assessed, documented, managed. It is not, in the immediate practical shock of discovering it, processed as a specific warning about the predator risk configuration that now exists in the grass immediately surrounding the farm. But it is exactly that. Kigandu Gichuru was 41 years old. His family had worked that land for years. He knew the ground around the farmstead the way people know the ground they have walked every day of their working lives, without needing to think about it, without consciously navigating it, with a physical familiarity that is genuine and hard-won and real. His younger brother Waweru was 36. The two of them worked alongside each other. Before sunrise on April 22nd, they went out to assess the overnight damage and locate the remaining herd. From a livestock management standpoint, that is the correct response. That is what you do. You don't leave the herd unlocated. You don't wait until full daylight to find out where the surviving animals scattered. You go out, you assess what happened, you account for your animals, and you begin managing what comes next. From a predator risk standpoint, it placed two men on foot, in low light, in tall, wet grass, within meters of a site where lions had been actively feeding hours earlier. The grass had grown thick from the recent rains. In the densest patches, visibility at ground level was limited to a few meters, 2 or 3 meters in some places. You could see directly in front of you, and nothing beyond that. Let me explain the behavioral science here, because it is specific, and it is not intuitive. And it is the thing that makes the morning of April 22nd dangerous in a way that nothing about its surface appearance announced. African lions are the only genuinely social big cat species. They operate within coordinated groups that hold defined territorial ranges. A lion, or a group of lions, does not necessarily travel far from a feeding site between intervals. They rest in grass or bush cover within the immediate area. They are already there. They have already demonstrated willingness to engage prey at that exact location. They are alert, oriented, fully aware of their surroundings, and resting in low vegetation that absorbs their outline completely. Based on witness accounts and the physical evidence at the scene, at least one lion was still in the area near the calf carcass when Kigandu and Waweru moved into the grass. Kigandu was ahead. The strike came from the side, from cover, before he could identify what was near him. Waweru retreated and raised the alarm from the farmstead. Kigandu Gichuru was already dead by the time help arrived at the site. And I think what this case illustrates more clearly than almost anything else I've looked at is the gap between what we know in the abstract and what we're able to do with that knowledge in the real moment, when the practical demands of a life override the theoretical risk assessment. While Tsavo had taken Kigandu Gichuru in grass that hid what he had no reason to expect, the Northern Territory of Australia would soon demonstrate something equally important, that a posted warning and a prior uneventful visit do not cancel each other out. In the right combination, they produce something more dangerous than either one alone. It was January 11th, 2014. Australia's Northern Territory during the wet season feels heavy in a way that is difficult to explain unless you have stood inside it yourself. The air sticks to your skin. Heat rises from the ground even before noon. Thick green vegetation presses inward from every side, swallowing narrow tracks and crowding the edges of waterways until visibility shrinks to only a few feet through the brush. Storm clouds had been building since early morning. The sky was pale gray, the light flat and dull, making distance harder to judge. Waterholes scattered across the region sat dark and still beneath the trees, their surfaces almost black beneath the overcast sky. Some were connected to estuaries miles away. Others flooded during wet season and merged into hidden channels through the bush. From the outside, they often looked peaceful. That was part of the danger. The waterhole the Namarli family visited that day looked no different from dozens of others scattered through the Northern Territory. Dark water, mud banks, thick grass leaning over the edge, no movement visible on the surface. There were 3 crocodile warning signs posted near the access track. Corey Namarli was 38 years old. He had visited the location before on fishing trips and had entered the water there without incident. His wife, Marissa, knew the area too. Their 2 children, 14-year-old Jaden and 9-year-old Alina, had come along because the family planned to spend the afternoon fishing and cooking near the water before rain moved in later that evening. Nothing about the trip felt reckless to them. That detail matters. People often imagine dangerous animal encounters beginning with obvious bad decisions, but many fatal encounters begin inside ordinary routines: family outings, fishing trips, familiar roads, familiar rivers, situations that feel safe specifically because they have been repeated before. The Namarlis unloaded supplies near the bank shortly after midday. Jaden helped carry fishing gear while Alina stayed near her mother arranging food containers beneath a tree line for shade. The children remained on the bank while Corey prepared to wade into the shallows to check a snagged fishing line near the edge of the water. The signs were visible the entire time. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth. Adult males in northern Australia regularly exceed 16 feet in length and can weigh over 2,000 pounds. Unlike predators that rely on chasing prey, crocodiles are ambush animals. They remain motionless for long periods with only their eyes and nostrils exposed above water. Features so small and still, they disappear completely against dark surfaces and floating vegetation. When they attack, the movement is explosive. The surface launch strike reaches full bite contact in less than half a second. Once the bite lands, the crocodile immediately uses rotational force, the death roll, to destabilize and drown prey before dragging it underwater. Corey stepped into knee-deep water near the bank. From where Marissa stood, nothing looked wrong. The water remained flat except for light ripples around Corey's legs. Jaden had reportedly turned away briefly to untangle fishing gear when the attack happened. The crocodile exploded from the left side of the bank. Witness evidence later suggested the animal had been concealed only a few feet away inside flooded grass near the shoreline. The initial strike caught Corey low on the leg and pulled him sideways instantly before he could regain balance. Marissa screamed and ran toward the water. That reaction is common in family attacks involving crocodiles. Human beings move toward each other automatically during emergencies, especially parents and spouses. Survival logic disappears behind instinct. Jaden followed seconds later. The bank collapsed into chaos almost immediately. Mud gave way beneath their feet. The crocodile rolled violently in shallow water, while Corey disappeared beneath the surface. Marissa reportedly reached for him just as the animal surfaced again near the shoreline. Investigators later believe the second strike occurred during that moment. Alina remained near the tree line, screaming for her family to come back. Witnesses from a nearby access road later reported hearing shouting echo across the waterhole before the sounds abruptly stopped. Jaden survived only because he never fully entered the deeper water. As the bank collapsed under movement and mud, he reportedly lost footing near the edge, but managed to grab exposed roots along the shoreline while the surface erupted beside him. Emergency responders later found deep drag marks, disturbed mud, and heavy slide patterns indicating multiple violent rotations near the bank. By the time help arrived, the waterhole had gone still again. Recovery teams searched through the evening and into the following morning. Corey, Marissa, and Alina were recovered from the waterway over the next day. Wildlife officers later located and removed a large saltwater crocodile from the connected system nearby. Jaden was the only surviving family member. The investigation found no failure in the warning system. The signs had been posted clearly at the access point before the family arrived. They remained there afterward, and I think that's the part that stays with me most about incidents like this. The signs were accurate, the danger was real, but human beings are not built to fear something consistently when nothing bad happened the last time. The problem is that crocodiles do not operate on human memory. The animal hidden beside that waterhole on January 11th did not care that the family had visited before without incident. To the crocodile, every approach to the shoreline was simply another opportunity, and this time, the opportunity arrived all at once. while a Northern Territory waterhole had taken Kori Namarli in under a second from the bank's edge. A farming village in Maharashtra would close the gap between all the other stories in this episode. It was November 7th, 2013. The Junar region of Pune district in Maharashtra sits at the boundary between agricultural land and protected forest reserve. This is not unusual geography for that part of India. Settlement and forest have shared a boundary in this region for generations. The post-monsoon air had cooled. The scrub vegetation along the reserve edge had grown dense with seasonal growth. The village sat close to the tree line the way villages in this part of Maharashtra sit. The land was there. People farmed it and built on it and lived on it across generations. The reserve boundary was not a warning. It was just where the forest started. The Junar region has one of the highest documented rates of human-leopard conflict in India. I want to be precise about what that statement means. All the places in India where human beings and leopards share territory and come into conflict, Junar is documented as one of the most active. Dnyaneshwar Kshirshagar was 48 years old. He was a subsistence farmer. His household sat near the reserve boundary. He was not someone new to the area, not someone who had recently moved to the edge of the forest without understanding what that meant. He had lived there his entire life. The reserve edge was part of the landscape he moved through every day. The general fact of leopard presence in the surrounding forest was not news to him. What prompted him to go outside that night is not established in the available record. Let me say that again, because it is important. What prompted him to go outside that night is not established in the available record. His family found the door open the following morning. That is the entire visible decision point in this case. Going outside, after dark, near the reserve boundary in the Junar district. The chain of events begins there, with something that is not a dramatic choice, not an obvious risk accepted, not a warning disregarded. Just a door opened, a threshold crossed, a person stepping out of a structure into darkness for reasons that will never be fully known. Let me talk about leopards, because in the hierarchy of large cat danger, they are the species that people most consistently underestimate, partly because they are smaller than tigers and lions, and partly because their mode of operation in proximity to humans is so normalized that it stops registering as the thing that it actually is. Leopards are the most behaviorally adaptable of all large felids. As a documented behavioral pattern repeated across populations and regions, they use agricultural margins, drainage channels, and dense scrub on village outskirts as functional hunting range. Leopards are primarily nocturnal. Their visual systems gather available light far more efficiently than human eyes. They operate in conditions that are functionally dark to a person standing in the same space, conditions in which the person has essentially zero useful visual information about their surroundings, while the leopard retains full sensory access to that environment. They are not at a disadvantage at night. They are at maximum operational capacity. An adult leopard in approach mode produces almost no detectable sound before contact at close range. Adult leopards weigh between 88 and 198 pounds. By the scale of the other animals in this episode, that is relatively modest. But the ratio of physical power to body mass in a leopard is exceptional. They are the only large cat species documented to routinely carry prey heavier than themselves, vertically into trees. That behavior is not a curiosity. It is the most direct physical evidence of what that body size is actually capable of generating in terms of muscular output relative to weight. At night, near a settlement boundary in Junar, in the absence of any light source adequate to extend visual range meaningfully, the distance between a person and an approaching leopard can be effectively zero before any warning arrives. Not before sufficient warning arrives, before any warning arrives at all, based on the physical evidence recovered the following morning. Ground sign outside the door, a drag path in the soil leading toward the reserve boundary. The encounter had happened within a few meters of the structure. The leopard had been in close proximity to the settlement before the encounter. It had not been detected by anyone in the village that night. Dnyaneshwar was found at the reserve edge. Cause of death was consistent with a leopard's documented killing mechanism, compression injury to the cervical region. Forest Department officers responded, set traps, and captured a leopard in the area in the days that followed. Evidence consistent with an animal that had been operating in close proximity to human settlement for an extended period was noted in the post-capture assessment. Going outside, after dark, in a village in Junar, near a reserve boundary where leopard movement had been documented and tracked for years. That is not a decision that announces itself as dangerous when you make it. It is a decision you make without thinking, because you have made it hundreds of times before, because you have a reason for making it, because it is a completely normal thing that human beings do every day without consequence. Except that in Junar, on that boundary, on that night, the animal you could not see had already seen you. While the edge of a Maharashtra village had taken Dnyaneshwar Kshirshagar in darkness without a single moment of legible warning, the Sundarbans would close this episode in full daylight, where 15 years of of experience in the same forest turned out not to be the protection it had come to seem like. It was August 19th, 2018. The Sundarbans. If you need a single landscape to illustrate why experience alone is not sufficient protection against the kind of encounter we have been discussing throughout this episode, the Sundarbans is the one. It dismantles the assumption more completely than anywhere else, because it does it to the people who know it best. It is not a forest in the way people picture a forest. It is a tidal system, a flooding, shifting, saltwater mangrove landscape, where the ground that holds firm in the morning softens into mud by afternoon, where channels split and reconnect, and the embankment paths are barely wide enough for a careful step in single file, where the ambient noise of moving water, tidal activity, insects, and the constant low-level sound of a living wetland fills the acoustic space around you from every direction. The monsoon had pushed the tidal channels above their usual levels. The mangrove interior sat dense and close under a sky that pressed heat downward through the canopy without relief. Mohibul Ghazi had been making honey collection runs into the Sundarbans for over 15 years. 15 years. That is not background information about his experience level. It is the central fact of this story. He was 40 years old. He was licensed. He was not a casual entrant into this forest. He was someone who had spent the better part of 2 decades developing the kind of practical knowledge about a specific place that field guides cannot produce and formal training cannot replicate. Tidal timing, embankment conditions, channel crossings. He knew this landscape in the way that only extended, repeated, practical immersion produces. A bodily, intuitive familiarity that sits below conscious thought and functions as a second sensory system. His cousin, Hazmat Sardar, was 24. He had been joining these runs for 2 seasons. He mostly followed Mohibul's lead. That was the right instinct. When you are new to a place, you follow the person who knows it. The crew had been pressing deeper into the interior than usual that season. Yields in the outer zones had been low. The season required results, and results required going where the yields were. The Forest Department had issued active warnings about elevated Bengal tiger movement in the deeper sections. At some point during the collection, Mohibul and Hazmat separated from the rest of the group to work a stretch of embankment, tidal water on one side, a dense wall of mangrove root on the other. The path was narrow enough that both men moved in single file. According to the route reconstruction assembled afterward from physical evidence, they were moving against the wind at that section of the embankment. In Bengal tiger habitat, moving against the wind removes the one sensory layer that sometimes provides marginal warning at close range. Whatever marginal warning might have been available on that embankment, that choice in direction removed it. Bengal tigers in the Sundarbans are not the same as Bengal tigers in other habitat types. They have adapted over generations to a landscape unlike any other tiger environment on Earth. They swim tidal channels. They move through root networks and mangrove thicket in conditions that generate continuous ambient acoustic cover. The water, the insects, the tidal movement, filling the space that a large moving animal would otherwise occupy with detectable sound. They are, in the specific context of this landscape, almost acoustically invisible. The killing mechanism is a sustained bite to the nape of the neck or the throat, less than 2 meters. That is not a distance from which a human being can generate meaningful separation when the animal has already committed to the contact. Based on physical evidence collected by Forest Department officers, tracks, disturbed mud, drag sign, disrupted vegetation at a specific bend of the embankment, the encounter happened at a section where the mangrove root wall closed in from one side and visibility into the vegetation from the path was effectively zero. The tiger had not followed them to that section. It had been positioned in the root structure before they arrived. The 2 men walking in single file had approached the position. The distance had simply closed by the time they reached the bend. Mohibul was at the front of the pair. The strike was directed at the nape, consistent with documented Bengal tiger killing behavior in the Sundarbans. Hazmat, directly behind him, retreated immediately and reached the main group. Forest officers reached the site several hours later. The physical record described a large tiger that had been stationary in the root structure, not hunting in an active pursuit sense, not chasing, not tracking, occupying a space that 2 men walked into from the open end of the path. Mohibul Ghazi did not survive. He was 40 years old, 15 years in the Sundarbans, more experience in that specific environment than nearly anyone else in his crew that day. 15 years of trips that ended correctly. Experience is the variable that appears most often in the Sundarbans fatality record, not on the safe side of the ledger. On the other side,